The Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything.
An elderly monk in a remote Ethiopian monastery spent his final days whispering something to the younger monks gathered around him. What he passed on was not a prayer or a blessing. It was a secret that his community had been protecting for generations, words spoken by Jesus after the resurrection, words that the Western Bible does not contain. And according to the monk, the time for that secret to remain hidden was ending. The secret that survived. High in the Ethiopian mountains stands a monastery where the air is thin, the climate is cool, and thick stone walls keep the inside temperature steady throughout the year. Communities like this have existed for many centuries, surviving wars, political change, and the rise and fall of empires. Their remote location helped protect them, allowing their libraries and oral traditions to remain largely untouched by outside influence. What these monasteries preserved was not always the same as the traditions found in Western Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church developed separately during the early centuries of Christianity and kept a wider collection of ancient writings than those included in the Western biblical canon. Many of these texts continued to be studied long after they had disappeared from mainstream Christian traditions elsewhere. According to the tradition, the dying monk shared something very specific with those gathered around him. He was not passing on a vague legend or a mysterious belief. He was referring to teachings preserved in a text his community had studied for generations, describing what Jesus said and taught during the 40 days between his resurrection and ascension. In the New Testament, this period receives only brief attention. The Gospels describe the resurrection, record a few appearances to the disciples, and then move to the ascension. Very little is said about Jesus' teaching during those weeks. The Ethiopian tradition presents a different picture. Holds that these 40 days contain some of Jesus' most important teachings, carefully preserved in ancient texts and passed down through generations of monks who believed they had been entrusted with protecting this knowledge until the right time. The 81-book Bible. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church uses a Bible containing 81 books, making it the largest biblical canon still used by any Christian church today. By comparison, the Protestant Bible contains 66 books, while the Catholic Bible contains 73. This difference exists because the Ethiopian Church preserved several ancient writings that other Christian traditions later left out. Among these books is the Book of Enoch, an ancient text quoted directly in the New Testament letter of Jude. Although it was widely known among early Christians, it is included only in the Ethiopian biblical canon. Another important book is Jubilees, which expands on many events described in Genesis. The Ethiopian Bible also contains its own version of the books of Maccabees, different from those found in the Catholic canon. These writings were familiar to many early Christian communities. Their exclusion from most Western Bibles resulted from centuries of church councils, theological debates, and decisions about which books should be included in Scripture. The Ethiopian Church followed its own path and continued preserving texts that other traditions set aside. One of the most important ancient manuscripts in Ethiopia is the Gerama Gospels. Radiocarbon dating places them between about 330 and 650 CE, making them among the oldest surviving Christian manuscripts in the world. Because they were preserved in Ethiopia, they remained largely untouched by later developments that shaped Western Christianity. According to Ethiopian tradition, one significant text is the Mashafa Kadan, or Book of the Covenant. It gives a much fuller account of Jesus' 40 days between the resurrection and ascension, describing teachings and spiritual instructions that are not found in the canonical Gospels. Supporters of this tradition believe that understanding the Mashafa Kedan also requires understanding the Book of Enoch, since both texts share a common spiritual framework that has remained central within the Ethiopian tradition. What Enoch contains? The Book of Enoch describes events that the Genesis account references only briefly. It provides the detailed backstory of the beings called the Watchers, who in Genesis are mentioned as the sons of God, who came to earth and produced offspring with human women. Genesis passes over this event in a few verses and moves on. Enoch devotes a significant portion of its length to describing it in detail. The Watchers, in Enoch's account, were a group of angelic beings who made a deliberate choice to leave their assigned position and enter the material world. They taught human beings things that they were not supposed to know: metalworking, cosmetics, astronomy beyond what was appropriate, the arts of war, the combination of forbidden knowledge and the mixing of categories that should have remained separate produced consequences that the Enoch account describes in terms that carry the same weight as catastrophe language across multiple traditions. The beings produced by the union of the Watchers and human women were the Nephilim, described in Enoch as beings of enormous size and destructive power who consumed what the human world had produced and then began consuming each other. The violence and disorder that resulted was what led to the flood in the Enoch framework, which gives the flood event a different kind of backstory than the Genesis account provides. Supporters of this view argue that the Book of Enoch did not fit the theological direction of Western Christianity. Its descriptions of angels, forbidden knowledge, and a disrupted cosmic order differed from the doctrines that became central during the church councils of the 4th and 5th centuries. The Ethiopian church kept it. The monks who preserved it understood it as essential context for everything that followed, including what the Mashafa Keden records about what Jesus said after the resurrection, the 40 days. The Mashafa Keden opens its account of the post-resurrection period with a scene that is specific in its setting and its tone. Jesus gathers his disciples. The gathering is not casual. The text describes it with the urgency of a final briefing before a long absence, a commander giving his closest people the information they will need to operate without him present. What Jesus says in the Mashafa Keden is different in character from what the canonical Gospels record in his post-resurrection appearances. The canonical accounts focus on the fact of the resurrection, on commissions to preach and baptize, on the promise of the Holy Spirit. The Mashafa Keden records teachings that go deeper into the nature of spiritual life, the dangers that will face the community he is leaving behind, and the mechanics of how the human interior connects to the divine. The first major teaching concerns what organized religion will become. Jesus warns his disciples specifically about the future of the institution that will be built in his name. He does not tell them not to gather together or not to teach. What he warns against is the process by which the gathering and teaching become an end in themselves rather than a means towards something internal. The language the text uses is specific. Do not build temples of stone as if the stone itself has power. Build the temple of the heart. This warning is followed by predictions that read, to anyone familiar with the history of European Christianity, as uncomfortably accurate. Men will use his name to accumulate wealth. Empires will take the symbol of his death and use it to justify killing. Institutions built to transmit his teachings will become mechanisms for controlling those teachings and those who receive them. The text does not present these predictions as condemning the tradition that grew from Jesus' life. It presents them as warnings given to the disciples precisely so that the community they built would know the difference between the genuine transmission and its corruption. The warning was given because the thing being warned against was understood to be coming. What makes this section of the Mashafa Keden significant in light of the dying monk's tradition is that it suggests the 40 days were used specifically to prepare the disciples for the long period of institutional development that would follow. Jesus, in this account, was not simply confirming the resurrection and giving a final commission. He was briefing the people who would carry the tradition forward on exactly what would go wrong with it and why. The two winds. The most detailed section of the Mashafa Keden's account of the 40 days focuses on what it calls the two winds. According to the Ethiopian monastic tradition, this teaching was one of the most important parts of Jesus' hidden instruction after the resurrection. The dying monk believed it was the core message that needed to be preserved and eventually shared. The text describes two forces working within every person: One is called the wind of life, the divine breath that gives true spiritual life and keeps a person connected to God. The other is the wind of error. It is described as entering through what people take in from the outside world, especially through the eyes and the mouth. Once inside, it quietly influences thoughts and perceptions until people struggle to separate truth from deception. According to the text, the long-term result of the wind of error is the calcification of the heart. This does not refer to the physical heart, but to the inner self. A living, open heart slowly becomes hard, closed, and unable to recognize spiritual truth. The Mashafa Kedan describes such a person as a walking tomb, alive on the outside, but spiritually empty within. Supporters of this tradition often connect this teaching to the Book of Enoch. In that book, the Watchers brought forbidden knowledge that damaged humanity's relationship with God. The wind of error is presented as the continuing effect of that separation, working within each person across generations. The remedy is described with the Greek word gnosis, meaning direct personal, knowledge rather than belief, based only on authority. The practice involves quietly observing one's own thoughts instead of automatically following them. Similar forms of self-observation appear in Christian contemplative prayer, Buddhist mindfulness, and Sufi spiritual practice. According to the Mashafa Kedan, this inner awareness weakens the influence of the wind of error. The text says the kingdom of heaven is found in the quiet space between thoughts, where a person can experience God's presence directly. Within this tradition, the Council of Nicaea is seen as the point when teachings focused on direct inner experience disappeared from the mainstream Western Christian tradition, while Ethiopian monasteries continued to preserve them. Science in the ancient text. The Mashafa Kedan contains passages that have drawn attention from researchers outside the field of biblical studies, because some of what the text describes corresponds to things that modern science has discovered, through means unavailable to whoever wrote the original text. The passages about atmospheric phenomena describe what the text calls storehouses of snow and structured channels through which winds move. The language is ancient, and the categories it uses are not those of modern meteorology, but the picture it produces of precipitation systems organized in structured pathways moving across the Earth's surface corresponds closely to what atmospheric scientists call atmospheric rivers, the large-scale channels of moisture transport that govern precipitation patterns across continents. The concept that weather is structured rather than random, and that it moves in organized channels rather than dispersing uniformly, was not the intuitive assumption of ancient observers. The Mashafa Kedan describes it as something known. A passage describing a hidden abyss of water beneath the earth was long considered symbolic. In 2014, researchers found evidence that minerals deep within Earth's mantle contain vast amounts of water, possibly exceeding the volume of all surface oceans, though the water is locked inside crystal structures rather than existing as liquid. Neither of these correspondences proves that the Mashafa Kedan was produced by people with modern scientific instruments. What they suggest is that the text was drawing on a tradition of knowledge about the natural world that was more extensive than what the conventional picture of ancient science allows for. The breath practices. Alongside its theological ideas and descriptions of the universe, the Mashafa Kedan also contains practical instructions. These are not presented as general advice for living a better life. Instead, they are described as specific methods with specific purposes, said to have been taught by Jesus to his disciples during the 40 days after the resurrection. According to the text, these practices were meant to help believers experience the spiritual truths that the teachings describe, not just understand them in theory. One of the main practices involves careful control of the breath. The instructions are detailed, describing different breathing rhythms and lengths that are believed to create certain inner effects. Another practice focuses on directing attention inward. Instead of allowing the mind to wander, practitioners are instructed to concentrate on particular inner experiences in a set order. The text presents these methods as disciplined exercises that require patience and regular practice, rather than quick techniques for spiritual growth. Researchers who study meditation and contemplative traditions have pointed out that these practices share noticeable similarities with methods found in Indian yoga, Tibetan Buddhism, and the early Christian Desert Fathers, especially the tradition of hesychasm, which emphasizes inner silence and constant prayer. Although these traditions developed in different places and under different religious beliefs, they all include disciplined breathing, focused attention, and the search for deep inner stillness. This has led some scholars to explore whether similar spiritual experiences encouraged similar methods, even when the traditions were largely separate. The Mishaffa Kadan, however, does not describe these practices as borrowed from another culture or religion. It presents them as part of the original teaching Jesus gave to his disciples during the 40 days. Ethiopian monastic communities have preserved these methods for centuries, passing them from one generation to the next. When an elderly monk shared his final instructions with younger monks, he was not simply repeating beliefs. He was passing on a living practice that his community believed had been faithfully preserved since the earliest days of Christianity. The Wienering about deception. The Mishaffa Kedan's account of the 40 days includes a sustained passage about what Jesus describes as the Great Deception. It is one of the most specific and most studied sections of the text, because what it describes does not fit the conventional image of a future villain. The deception Jesus warns against in the Mishaffa Kedan will wear his face. It will speak his name. It will build structures in his honor and attract enormous numbers of people to those structures. It will look, from the outside, exactly like what he was pointing toward. And according to the text, it will be the most effective instrument of spiritual destruction that humanity will encounter, precisely because it resembles the genuine thing closely enough that the difference is difficult to detect from the outside. The monks who preserved this text understood this warning as pointing towards something that was already in motion, not as a prediction of a specific future figure who would arrive dramatically and make his opposition to genuine teaching obvious. The Antichrist, in the Mishaffa Kedan's framework, is not a recognizable enemy. It is a system that uses the genuine tradition as a shell, while replacing its interior content with something that serves different purposes. The specific things the text says this system will do are consistent with what the historical record shows the institutional church doing in the centuries following the period when the Mishaffa Kedan and related texts were excluded from the Western canon. Accumulation of material wealth in the name of spiritual mission. Use of fear as a primary motivating tool. Control of access to spiritual knowledge through institutional gatekeeping. The transformation of the interior practice of the 40 days teaching into external ritual performed by specialists on behalf of a passive laity. The monks did not read this as a condemnation of all institutional religion. They read it as a warning given specifically to help those within the tradition recognize when the form had separated from the content and to find their way back to what was genuine. The Ark in Axum. The city of Axum in northern Ethiopia is home to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Inside a smaller chapel adjacent to the main church building, in a room that only one person on earth is permitted to enter, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition claims that the Ark of the Covenant is kept. The claim is not new. It appears in the Kebra Nagast, the Ethiopian national epic, which describes the Ark's journey from Jerusalem to Ethiopia through the story of Menelik, the son born to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Menelik, in the account, traveled to Jerusalem as a young man to meet his father, was recognized by Solomon as his heir, and returned to Ethiopia accompanied by the firstborn sons of the Israelite priests, who brought the ark with them. The guardian of the ark, whoever holds that role at any given time, is a single individual who is appointed for life and who, once appointed, never leaves the chapel grounds again. The guardians have been described by observers permitted to speak with them from outside as showing specific physical symptoms over the course of their tenure. Deteriorating vision consistent with cataract development. Pale skin inconsistent with sun exposure in a country with strong sunlight, and significantly shortened lifespans compared to the general population. These symptoms, taken together, are consistent with the effects of prolonged exposure to ionizing radiation. They are the same pattern of symptoms that the biblical accounts of the ark's effects on people who came into unauthorized contact with it describe in general terms. They are also what you would expect from a person spending their life in close proximity to an object emitting a consistent low level of radiation. The Knights Templar, the medieval military order whose documented interests in sacred objects and ancient knowledge extended well beyond their official mandate, made at least one expedition to Ethiopia specifically in connection with the Ark. What they found or concluded from that expedition is not documented in any surviving record. The connection between the Western Christian tradition's most powerful military order and the Ethiopian tradition's most significant sacred object suggests that the Ark's presence in Axum was not unknown in the medieval European Church. It was simply not something the Western tradition chose to make central to its own account. The churches below ground. In the 12th century, in the Ethiopian highland town of Lalibela, 11 remarkable churches were carved directly into solid volcanic rock. They were not built by stacking stone blocks. Instead, workers removed massive amounts of rock, leaving behind complete churches whose walls, floors, ceilings, windows, and columns remained connected to the original bedrock. This made the project very different from ordinary construction. Every cut had to be planned perfectly because mistakes could not be repaired once the rock was removed. The most famous of these churches is the Church of St. George. It is carved in the shape of a Greek cross, reaching about 12 meters below the surface. From above, only the cross-shaped roof is visible. The proportions are highly precise, and the surrounding walls are cut almost straight down. Even more impressive is the drainage system carved into the rock. For around 800 years, it has carried away heavy seasonal rainfall without flooding the church, showing a deep understanding of engineering and the local landscape. Historians generally believe that all 11 churches were completed during the reign of King Lalibela in about 24 years. The amount of rock removed was enormous, yet there is little archaeological evidence showing where it was taken. This has added to the mystery surrounding the site. The monks who continue to serve these churches preserve a different explanation through oral tradition. They say that human workers carved during the day, while angels continued the work at night using tools of light. Some modern writers have suggested that this phrase could describe advanced technology, such as energy-based cutting methods, while others see it as a symbolic way of honoring extraordinary craftsmanship. The monks themselves do not treat it as symbolism. They regard the story as a true account of how the churches were completed. The churches are also connected by narrow tunnels carved through solid rock. Many sections are completely dark, forcing visitors to move slowly, sometimes sideways. According to tradition, these passages were used for spiritual preparation through silence and darkness. The journey through the tunnels symbolized an inner journey, teaching that the path toward divine light begins by passing through darkness within oneself. The bloodline. For nearly 3,000 years, Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty claimed direct descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba through their son Menelik. In Ethiopian tradition, this was not viewed as legend, but as the foundation of the monarchy's political and spiritual authority. According to this tradition, the royal family shared the same ancient lineage connected to the House of David. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke trace Jesus' ancestry through King David, and the Ethiopian royal line claimed descent from Solomon, David's son. This placed the Ethiopian monarchy within the same biblical family tree, according to its historical tradition. In the 20th century, the Rastafarian movement embraced this royal lineage. Followers identified Emperor Haile Selassie, the last ruler of the Solomonic dynasty, as the promised Messiah and the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Their belief was based on Ethiopia's royal tradition and their interpretation of biblical prophecies. Modern genetic research has added an interesting piece to the discussion. Studies have found evidence of ancient migration from the Levant into parts of the Ethiopian highlands around 3,000 years ago, roughly matching the period associated with the Queen of Sheba story. While genetics cannot confirm the specific account of Solomon, Sheba, and Menelik, the findings do suggest that a migration consistent with the traditional timeline likely occurred. Why now? The dying monks' tradition included one important belief about timing. The secret was never meant to stay hidden forever. It was meant to be protected until the right time arrived. According to the community that preserved the Mashafa Kedan, the text itself describes the conditions under which its hidden teachings should finally be shared. The description speaks of a future age connected by vast networks that spread illusion as easily as truth. It describes a world where information travels so quickly that few people stop to examine it carefully. Images and messages are designed to trigger emotions instead of understanding. People have endless access to knowledge, yet often struggle to tell what is genuine from what is false. The result is a world filled with noise, but lacking the inner silence needed for real wisdom. The monks believed they were living in exactly that time. They saw the rise of the internet, social media, and artificial intelligence as matching the conditions described in their tradition. To them, these developments marked the moment when the sealed knowledge was meant to be opened because humanity had reached the age it was written for. Within this tradition, the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE is viewed as the point when these teachings were sealed away from widespread use. The monks believed the practical methods connected to Jesus' 40 days after the resurrection were preserved only in isolated Ethiopian monasteries, far from centers of political and religious power. The dying monk shared his secret because he believed the time of quiet preservation had ended. The texts were spreading, people were asking questions, and the moment described in the Mashafa Kedan had finally arrived.
Oldale monk passed on a tradition preserved for 2,000 years. Its ancient texts claim to reveal teachings from Jesus 40 days after the resurrection. The monks believed that world had arrived. The seal is broken, the texts are available. Subscribe, because this tradition goes deeper than one script can carry, and the next part of it goes further still.